So I'd like to do a sample of a close reading of Poem 1, written by Sappho, as translated by Anne Carson. This is the version of Poem 1 by Sappho that is in your textbook, the Norton Anthology of World Literature, shorter third edition. There's a few things I'd like to do in terms of this short reading. The first thing is, if we look at the first stanza, right, the first group of lines in this particular poem, we have a pretty good example of what in the introductory PowerPoint we call a sapphic stanza, or sometimes these are just called sapphics. This is Sappho's preferred form of poetry. In the original language, in her dialect of ancient Greek, each of the three first lines of the four-line stanza would have been what we call hendecasyllabic. That means that they would have had 11 syllables in the ancient Greek. The fourth line, which is visibly shorter, is what is called an adonic. And that one in the original Greek would have had only 5 syllables. So this is a nice example. What we see here is that our translator Anne Carson has preserved the 8-syllable pattern in the English translation of the first line, and she's also preserved the 5-syllable pattern in the translation of the fourth line. The two in between, the second and the third line, she didn't maintain the 11-syllable pattern, but that's more difficult to do in a translation. But this is a good example of a sapphic stanza. Now, other things you want to know about this particular poem by Sappho, it's a lot easier to understand if you're aware that there are 2 speakers, but Sappho uses no quotation marks in the poem. So in pink, in a straight underline, I've put what would normally be formatted as quotations of words spoken by the goddess Aphrodite. In the squiggly or wavy underline in pink, I've put what would be paraphrases of words spoken aloud by Aphrodite in the poem. So you can see this down here, right, in the middle section of the poem. So words that would actually be spoken out loud by Aphrodite, so I've jotted down some quotation marks here in pink as well, would be, whom should I persuade now again to lead you back into her love? Who, O Sappho, is wronging you? So this would have been a quotation from Aphrodite. Whereas the stuff that's underlined here in the squiggly or wavy underline in pink, these are paraphrases of things that Aphrodite is saying to Sappho. Now again, I have suffered, and why now again I am calling out. These are paraphrases, right? Okay, now, another important thing to know about this particular poem, as it said in the introductory PowerPoint, Sappho's poems were actually songs. So this is a very particular form of song, Poem 1. This is not true of all her poems, but Poem 1 is what we call a hymn, right? So it's a religious song. Specifically, it's a form of ancient Greek hymn called a kletic, K-L-E-T-I-C hymn. And a kletic hymn traditionally has 3 parts. And we see Sappho including all 3 parts in Poem 1. So first, there's what's called the invocation and the summons. So here's where you invoke the god or goddess that you're praying to in your hymn, right? And you summon them to come and listen to you. The second part is what was called the citation of previous requests, and then also an accounting of the god's past deeds. So we'll just call that the citation for short. And then the third part is what we would call the entreaty. So this is the singer, the prayers, for lack of a better word, present request, right? So in this particular poem, Poem 1, the invocation and summons is from line 1 through the middle of line 5. So from the words deathless Aphrodite through to the words but come here. So here Sappho is invoking the goddess Aphrodite by name. She is summoning Aphrodite to her to listen to what she has to say. So that's the idea of the invocation and summons. The second part, the citation of previous requests and the god's past deeds, then starts in the middle of line 5, right where the invocation left off, and continues through most of the rest of the poem through the end of line 24. So here what we see is that Sappho is recounting previous requests that she's made of the goddess Aphrodite. She's giving the goddess Aphrodite credit for helping her in the past and telling her she would like her to do something similar now. So that's the citation. And then the third part, the entreaty, is really just the last 4 lines of this particular poem. So it starts at line 25 and continues through line 28. So here is Sappho's present request, right? This is what she's asking Aphrodite to do for her now. So like I said, this is not the structure that Sappho uses in all her poems. They are all songs, but they're not all this particular type of song, the cletic hymn. But it's interesting to note that she follows this format very faithfully, no pun intended. Another thing to think about here when we look at poem 1 is the level of familiarity versus formality. So what we notice is that, the first half of the poem, roughly speaking, right about where I drew this squiggly line up, has a very formal tone, right? So Aphrodite is addressed as deathless Aphrodite of the spangled mind, child of Zeus who twists lures. This is a very formal sort of title to give to the goddess Aphrodite. Whereas, below this midpoint here, where I drew the squiggly line on down, this is pretty familiar, right? The conversation back and forth with Aphrodite, which reinforces this idea that Aphrodite is a deity who has helped out Sappho in the past, right? They're rather familiar with one another. And then we notice when she gets back to the end here, the entreaty, the part that begins at line 25, her tone becomes more formal again when she makes her formal request, her present request to the goddess. So, like I said, familiarity, formality, we could take a look at. The last thing here, and this is mentioned in some of the introductory materials, oftentimes in her poetry, Sappho is trying to elevate lyric poetry, which tends to focus on female emotion, to the same level as the then more dominant form of epic poetry, which tended to focus more on male action. So we see this very explicitly in the last stanza here. Our translator in our textbook, Anne Carson, translates the last stanza as, "Come to me now, loose me from hard care, and all my heart longs to accomplish. You be my ally." And this word ally is interesting because it's one that oftentimes we hear in the context of war, which is often a subject of epic poetry. The actual word that Sappho uses in Greek is sumakos, which translates literally to ally in battle. So we have the sense of ally captured here in Anne Carson's translation. In this handout, though, I've included the last stanza also as it's translated by Aaron Pachugian, who is one of my favorite modern translators of Sappho. You have to be a pretty nerdy English professor to have a favorite modern translator of Sappho, but here we are. So Mr. Pachugian instead translates this as, "Come to me now," which is similar. "Drive off this brutal distress. Accomplish what my pride demands. Come, please, and in this battle, stand by my side." So here, we had the sense of an ally in Anne Carson's translation. Here in Mr. Pachugian's translation, we have this sense of battle, right? So between the two of them, they're capturing this idea of sumakos, sort of collectively. So here, once again, Sappho is trying to elevate love to the same level of importance as war, basically. So elevating the lyric to the same level as the epic. So this is our sample close reading of Poem 1 written by Sappho. My color-coded copy of the poem is available in the materials for Module 3 as well. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.